Is Damon Embling, and I'm going to be hosting this session this afternoon. And just some few housekeeping rules just before we get underway. If you are not speaking during this session, please make sure that you have your microphone muted. And also, if you do have any questions, please do leave them in the chat box just next to the video screen. And be sure to include your name, what your question is, of course, and who you want to direct that question to. We're going to have a great lineup of guests for you this afternoon during this session. In a moment, I'm going to be introducing you to Marie-Anne-Jean Marinescu, who's the EPP coordinator for the Committee on Transport and Tourism, or TRAN, at the European Parliament, and also the chair of the European Parliament's Sky and Space Intergroup. But first, let me just introduce you to the rest of our speakers this afternoon, our great panel. We have Thomas Reinhardt, who's the Managing Director of Airlines for Europe, or A4E. We have Olivier Jankovic, who's the Director General at ACI Europe, representing airports all over Europe. Philippe Cornelis, who's the Director of Aviation at DG Move at the European Commission. We have Dr. Christian Paniet, who's from the European Union Aviation Safety Agency, or EASA. We're also joined this afternoon during this briefing by Dawn Wilson, who's the Managing Director of Northern Region Airlines at TUI Airways and TUI Fly Nordic. Jim Haas is also joining us in the special briefing this afternoon. He's the Director of Product Marketing at Boeing. And also Bruno Fargion is joining us. He's the lead for Keep Trust in Air Travel initiative at Airbus. So a very warm welcome to all of our guests joining us for this session this afternoon. So we're coming together at a crucial time for the aviation sector in Europe, aren't we? With border restrictions easing slowly across some EU member states, and also some flights taking to the skies again. This, of course, after the COVID-19 pandemic had such a huge impact on the aviation industry here in Europe, which forms such a big part of Europe's economy. So without further ado, I'd like to get some opening remarks now from Marie-Anne-Jean Marinescu, who actually flew in to Brussels today. So over to you, Marie-Anne-Jean Marinescu.
To Brussels today in the morning. It was a good flight. I hope without any consequences. It's true, there are not so many passengers. So thank you very much for organizing and this event. I think it's a good time to discuss about this topic. As you know, in this period, we had a lot of discussions regarding travel, regarding transport, and also tourism. And one of the main issue in discussion was, of course, travel by plane. And I think that both Commission and EASA did their jobs, because Commission published guidelines regarding the safety rules for airports, for traveling by plane, and also EASA published some guidelines also regarding the travel regarding the plane, how to keep the staff, the personnel, the crew, and in the same time the passengers in a safe situation. There are discussions about, of course, filters, how it is the air in the cabin, and at the same time about the capacity of the planes. Now the most disputed issue is if should be a distance between passengers, which means to leave a row free, the middle row free. So this is what created some different opinions. There are colleagues here in the Parliament that are supporting this idea. They think that we need still to have some distance between passengers, and in the same time airlines are not so happy with this possible rule. Now I know I don't want to to direct the discussion in one direction. I can say my opinion. I think that we should take this step by step. I don't think that in the next period, I don't know, July, August, September will be a lot of passengers, even if the tourism period is starting. And for sure there will be people that will want to go in vacation by plane, but I don't think that it will be a lot of people in the planes. So I think that this rule with middle seat empty could be applied without any problem. And then we can see how the pandemic is developing, and then we can decide what to do the best. So I welcome, of course, all the participants, and I am also very interested to hear the opinions. And there is a large panel of I don't know institutions here, so we shall see opinions from different directions. So thank you very much. I'm here to hear all the opinions, and for me it will be very interesting, especially because we shall vote this week a resolution regarding tourism, and inside the resolution it's welcome the guidelines of EASA. Thank you.
Mr. Marinescu, thank you very much indeed for those insightful opening remarks, really helping us to set the scene for this confident traveller briefing this afternoon. If I can just remind that all our guests, if you're not speaking, please keep your microphones on mute, and when you do speak, obviously unmute them so we can hear you loud and clear. And of course, a reminder to our audience as well, if you have any questions, please do leave them in the chat box next to the video where you're watching this, and we'll put as many of those questions as we can to our panelists this afternoon. Do remember to leave your name there as well. So let me just bring in our first of our other guests this afternoon, and I'm going to go over to Thomas Reinhardt, who's the Managing Director of Airlines for Europe, or A4E. A very good afternoon to you, Thomas. Thanks for joining us in this very important discussion. Obviously, I was mentioning earlier that the aviation sector is a big part of Europe's economy in terms of its economical and sort of social impact that it has. But the pandemic, hasn't it, had a huge impact on this sector over recent months? I know IATA was saying that 2020 will go down as the worst year in financial history. Is it fair to say the industry has got through the worst of it, or is there still a lot to do? Is it too early to say that?
Thank you, Damon, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining our webinar. Yes, well, you know, what we call the gradual reopening of EU borders this week since yesterday. It's true that I think we've indeed reached a key milestone, you know, both for the recovery of Europe's aviation sector, but also for the wider EU economy, as a matter of fact. But I think it's too soon to say, no, I think we're not out of the woods yet, to be honest. It feels more like, how should I say, that we're seeing some much needed light at the end of the tunnel that most airlines have been crawling through the last few months, just trying to stay in business, trying to survive, and hoping they would make it to June, to be honest. Just to share some of the latest figures, we're pulling up a slide now if everything goes well with all of the participants. So since the crisis began, so basically since mid-March of this year, the airlines have endured a massive loss of liquidity. I think that's commonly known now. On top of that, of course, huge operational turmoil and very importantly, employment uncertainty. In parallel, we worked, of course, with our partners as soon as possible, many of whom are part of today's briefing, I understand. Plans on the restart needed to start as soon as possible as well, also during the crisis. And it's right, Damon, as you said, it was IATA who announced last week the latest figures, the latest forecast for this year. And well, it's not nice to hear, but you know, this year will go down as the worst year in history for airlines from a financial perspective, you know, with expected losses which are really flabbergasting of more than 80 billion euros. And that's assuming that all goes according to plan. and the virus is contained. So where does Europe stand in all of this? Well, unfortunately, we are among the top 3 worst affected regions globally in this crisis, just slightly behind North America, with almost 20 billion in net losses projected for this year. So what about 21? Of course, many people ask. So 21 currently is forecasted to be equally a very challenging year, as you can expect globally, but also certainly in Europe, with just over 14 billion in net losses, and that's currently projected. So it could be better, could be worse, but that's the figures we have at the moment. On our next slide here, you see that I think all of this is against, I think, the backdrop of aviation's role as a key driver for the European economy. I think this crisis, one of the things this crisis has shown is that aviation is really helping to continue to drive the European economy even during a crisis. So just as a reminder, some of the numbers here, I think it's good for an introductory section here. Aviation represents more than 12 million jobs and some 800 billion euros in European economic activity. So that's more than 3% of all employment in Europe and a bit more than 4% of the entire GDP in Europe. So these are important numbers, which I thought just show them again on the slides as part of this introduction.
So lots at stake, obviously, for Europe's aviation industry, but also for the EU itself in terms of the economic recovery. Thomas, you paint a pretty grim picture there about the impact that this has had on the industry, but we're seeing those sort of green shoots start to emerge this week, haven't we? I was watching EasyJet have its first flight from London Gatwick to Glasgow yesterday morning, the CEO very excited about that. Things are starting to move in the right direction again for the aviation industry. How are you and your sort of airline members, how have you been preparing for this week as we start to see planes taking to the sky again?
Well, as many people again around this table know, is that collaboration and constant communication with the relevant stakeholders, the relevant authorities, also the operational experts from our airline members is really key in the preparation, not only trying to facing the crisis where liquidity or the lack of it was a key challenge for the airlines, but again, for also the next step, what we call the return to normal operations. But I'm particularly proud of the positive spirit that helped us get through the beginning of the crisis, just as many airlines were in the painful process of grounding their fleet. I mean, some of them completely grounded their fleet until very recently, since yesterday. Just as also many were flying some of the longest routes in their history to bring EU citizens home safely from the crisis, you know, the famous repatriation flights. So I think that was a great moment when we realized that also together with our cargo members, just how important the role aviation plays, not only before the crisis, but also during a crisis like this, a global pandemic, which I haven't seen before.
Obviously, connectivity very important, both on a business and sort of holiday tourism front. I mean, obviously, we're at that time of year, aren't we, Thomas, where, we're coming up to the peak summer season, which would normally be the bumper season for particularly leisure airlines. How are you looking towards this summer, and what are some of the hopes over the coming months?
Yeah, and I think also our colleague from TUI, Don, can comment on this as well. I'm quite confident for this season. I know that from many of our airline members that the overwhelming majority of the passengers are really eager to fly again soon. And I think you've seen the first boost yesterday, which is very impressive. But of course, they all need a bit of reassurance. Passengers should really feel confident that it's really safe to fly again. Now, as the experts know, it was safe to fly before the crisis, and it will be safe to fly post-COVID-19.
Okay, Thomas, thanks for now. And we'll come back to you if we have some questions during this session. Of course, if you are watching this and you have any questions for Thomas or any of our other guests this afternoon, do leave them in that box just next to the video where you're watching, in the chat box, and we'll put as many of those to our panel as possible. I'd like to bring in our next guest now, Olivier Jankovic, who's the Director General of ACI Europe, which represents airports all over Europe. Olivier, we were just hearing from Thomas there about the importance of these coming months for the aviation sector, getting airlines back in the sky again. But of course, this is also about getting airports back to some sort of sense of normality, which have resembled ghost towns, I guess, over the past couple of months. How have you been preparing for this sort of gradual restart that we're now seeing?
Good afternoon, Damon, and thank you. Very happy to be here. And also, I'd like to thank first Thomas and A4E for inviting the airports to be part of this session, and thank also Mr. Marinescu as the co-host. Well, of course, for airports, we are desperate to see airlines flying again. And as Thomas mentioned, clearly yesterday was a key milestone, that was made possible by basically two developments. First, the coordinated action driven very much by the Commission to lift travel restrictions and border control in the first phase within Europe. And second, the very important EASA ECDC guidance on sanitary measures for air travel. And before I go into the situation of airports, I think it's very important to stress that indeed, I mean, those two developments per se show very clearly the value of the EU, because without the EU driving this, we wouldn't have been able to restart already where we are today. And I think too often people kind of miss out and tend to focus on the negative sides of the EU and not on the positives. But I think with those two developments, we have two amazing positives that I think need to be emphasized. Airports have been following very closely the definition of the EASA ECDC guidance. From the very start, we engaged with EASA. We were very supportive of EASA taking the lead, because we saw very clearly that having a uniform standard for sanitary measures across all the air travel journey was essential to ensure confidence and to make sure that all of Europe's airports, or at least a lot of them, could restart at the same pace. And since then, since those guidance were made public on the 20th of May, of course, airports have been rushing to implement them. Without even having already the regulatory framework defined at the national level, because you have to bear in mind that this guidance, of course, is only guidance. It's not per se mandatory, and it rests on each European state to translate them into their own legal order. So for us, it's been very important also to make sure that European states actually don't depart from this guidance. I think we have a very solid guidance, a very risk-based, balanced, and thought through guidance, which has been fed actually also by scientific advice from the medical side, with the ECDC being involved. So it's very important that we don't have now states, trying to add different things or depart from this guidance. As of yesterday, of course, as I mentioned, this is a key milestone. We're seeing passengers coming back, flying activity coming back. Of course, I think it's too early to speak about a recovery. It's just a restart. To give you an example, yesterday at Munich Airport, the airport welcomed about 5,000 passengers through its doors. On an equivalent day in June last year, it was 100,000 passengers. So clearly, we still have a long way to go. In terms of what we're predicting for the summer, we still see a very slow and gradual recovery. We estimate that in July, we might get 30% of our passenger traffic compared to last year, 40% by August, and by December, we might reach 70% for the month. So it will be a slow and gradual recovery. But I think the important thing is that with the measures we have now into place, we really can say that airports are among the safest spaces from a health and hygiene point of view. And that means that when it comes to the risk of COVID-19 transmission, I think clearly it's no doubt safer for people to go to their local airport than it is to go to their local supermarket. So I think now the onus is on us to really communicate and engage with the traveling public about what we have done, how we've done it, where those rules are coming from, and the fact that in days risk is minimized to the greatest extent possible.
Because Olivier, one aviation expert was saying to me the other day, a travel expert was saying that we're kind of moving away from what he described as a health crisis into a confidence crisis. Obviously, you accept that actually many people, me, you, and everybody else, we've been cooped up in our homes for many months. We haven't been able to do many of the things that we normally enjoy in life. You have got quite a job on your hands to actually convince those passengers to get back into the airports. I mean, what's the journey now going to be like for them? And what would be your message to people who aren't feeling so confident right now?
Well, I think it's about explaining to them what we've done, all the measures we've put into place. I think there's three critical things we're doing at the airport. Is first, we've reviewed all our operational processes, and we've done that really collaboratively with the airlines, with the ground handlers, with the customs and border control authorities, to ensure and facilitate physical distancing whenever possible and to the greatest extent. That's the first thing. The second thing is clearly enhanced cleaning and disinfection of our premises. And I think it's fair to recognize that when you look at that, we were already starting from quite a high level of cleanliness at the airport. I think it's fair to recognize that airports before this crisis were already amongst the most hygienic mass transportation infrastructure and public spaces in Europe. And that, I think, is also a reflection of continued investment by airports in the quality of their facilities and the cleaning level. And the third thing we've been working a lot, of course, is engaging with the staff, because actually before convincing the passengers to come back, you need to convince the staff that this is safe for them to go back to work. So we're really focused on those three things. I think what we will certainly need to do, in addition to communicate about those things, and this has been happening already at a very large scale. I mean, if you go on social media, you see all airports, having communicated massively about these things over the past weeks. But the other thing I think that is very important is that we need to get the message across that minimizing a transmission risk is, of course, the responsibility of the economic operators, in the first place, the airport and the airlines. But it is also a collective responsibility. So that means also responsibility of the passenger. I think passengers need to have a different behavior. It is about their individual responsibility as well. And it's about adherence to what I would call a new traveling etiquette. A new traveling etiquette that is likely to stay for quite some time.
New travel etiquette, new normal. Olivier Jankovic, Director General of ACI Europe, thank you very much indeed for now. We'll obviously come back to you if you have any questions from our audience, but thank you very much indeed for the moment. And anybody watching this, just a reminder, if you do have any questions for any of our guests this afternoon, do leave them in the chat box just next to the video where you're watching, and I'll put as many of those as possible to our guests this afternoon. You're watching this Confident Traveller briefing organised by Airlines for Europe. I'd like to head now to Brussels to our next guest, and we're going to move on to Philippe Cornelis, who's the Director of Aviation for DG Move at the European Commission. Philippe, we've heard about sort of the importance of coordination, harmonisation, if you like, in the EU as we have this sort of gradual restart of the aviation sector. I know that the EU Commission, along with EASA, the Aviation Safety Agency, have issued guidelines. How have you been helping to lay the foundations for this restart at an EU level?
Well, good afternoon, Damon, and good afternoon, everybody on the call. Glad to see also many familiar faces who have been with us through this crisis, and I hope we have been with them to some extent as well. Our focus has been in the past months to assist the aviation sector that has been one of the hardest hit in this COVID crisis, and in a way that has never happened before. And moreover, in a way that has been across Europe in a very much a symmetric shock to the sector. So what we have been focusing on in the last months is to help the sector survive this period. Because, of course, there are many fundamentally healthy companies that make up the aviation ecosystem who should not be allowed to go under because of this external shock that is not related to their fundamentals. That has been the focus for a number of months. But of course, nothing is better for the survival and the recovery than actually being able to restart flying. That's where the money is made. And that has been really the focus of the last few weeks. And I must say this week is a bit a special one, because yesterday was in a way the symbolic reopening of Europe, which we had tried to support from the Commission side by calling on all the member states to open borders from the 15th of June onwards. Some member states did it a bit earlier, some will follow in the coming days, but broadly speaking, we can say that Europe is open again for what is now called non-essential travel. And of course, it is that non-essential travel that is a precondition for the aviation sector to be able to resume. Now, what are the conditions that are needed to make this happen? Indeed, as was mentioned before, those conditions find themselves in areas that are not typically EU competence. They have to do with borders and immigration. They have to do with health policy. And those are areas where our competence is quite limited. So we have been trying to work through convincing, through coordinating member states and industry with the help of our specialized agencies like the ECDC and EASA, to provide expert advice on why it is now okay to open up borders and to allow non-essential travel. And I think this message has very much come across. A number of airlines have taken their first flights again yesterday, who had completely stopped flying, including Brussels Airlines here in Brussels. And we have seen traffic yesterday on the basis of Eurocontrol data, traffic back above 20% of the normal level, which is already a great increase from the 10% to which we had descended in the middle of the crisis. So what it takes for this resumption is the opening of borders, as I mentioned, and secondly, also an assurance that it is safe to travel, that safety is guaranteed along the journey. And I think here again, with the ECDC EASA guidelines, with the parallel work that has been going on in ICAO on the global guidelines that are called takeoff, I think those have really laid the basis for authorities, including the health authorities, who usually have the final say, to authorize the resumption of air travel. And we are convinced, and I'm sure my colleague from EASA can speak to that later on, convinced that it is indeed to fly. And people are definitely encouraged to do so. That's as much as we can do. For the rest, it's up to the airlines to convince travelers that it's okay to book and that it's interesting to fly.
Philippe, it's quite confusing for the public, though, at the moment, isn't it? There's people that will be worried about their safety still, but also people just confused about where they can actually travel to and come back from. I mean, you have this sort of mixture of eased border restrictions. We have the external border of the EU still closed, and we have countries like the UK. I know it's now not an EU member, but they now have quarantining in place. What are you doing to kind of help people understand what's going on right across Europe and to actually reassure them about what's going on?
Yes, that's an important concern. And I think also for the actual smooth running of aviation and the safety, it's important that passengers understand the rules. And for that purpose, they need to be very similar. I mean, this is the basis of flying, is that everywhere in the world, the rules are the same. In terms of safety demonstration, for example, is the same around the world, and that is very good for compliance. So we definitely want to stimulate states to stick as much as possible to the guidelines that have been published. If we see along the way that there are things to be improved in those guidelines, this will be possible with the common agreement of everybody. So it's a living document, and we will learn from experience. But I think we have also been quite clear from the Commission side, with the support of our medical experts, that in Europe today, quarantine measures, for example, are not needed. So we try to discourage that kind of measures. And let's see, maybe it will take a few more days or weeks, but I'm sure that we will get to a more harmonized approach in favor of open travel, at least in Europe, and from July onwards, with a set of third countries who are showing a similar epidemiological situation as ours.
Travel bubbles, travel corridors, I know are talked about a lot, and I know the EU does support those in principle. The other thing I wanted to just ask you about was this new website that's been set up at EU level to actually inform travellers of where they can go and what they can do and what kind of safety aspects they can expect.
Yes, indeed. The initiative was taken to start up a website from the Commission to provide up-to-date information for the citizens, because indeed this is one of the big questions that people have, and the level of insecurity when planning their holidays, for example, is what exactly are the rules and what will be the rules. So we hope with that website that we can help a little bit. And we count on all the industry and the member states to provide us with the input to make that website as complete and accurate as possible, and hopefully it will become a good reference.
Just in final sort of summary with you, I mean, how important are the coming months for the aviation sector, both in terms of its own recovery, but in terms of the EU's economic and social recovery?
Well, aviation is, of course, essential for particularly inside our continent that is, as we have now realized, much more integrated and interconnected than maybe we thought, many of us thought before. So people need to travel, people travel for work, people have families scattered around Europe. Our economies are extremely integrated and need the cargo capacity that goes into the bellies of aircraft. So there are many reasons why restarting aviation is essential for the wider economic recovery, definitely at level of European continent, and obviously as soon as possible also intercontinentally.
Philip Cornelis, Director of Aviation at DG Move at the European Commission, thank you very much indeed for now. Very interesting insights from an EU perspective about the restart of the aviation sector right now. I suppose my next guest really is a man of the moment. I'm going to cross over to Christian Paniet, who's from EASA, the European Union Aviation Safety Agency. Christian, thanks for joining us. We've heard about these guidelines mentioned so far in this debate. You know, you've authored these guidelines, which are really fundamentally important to the restart of aviation in the EU. Just to take us through some of the main headlines of these guidelines.
Thank you, Damon. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, we worked, as Philip mentioned before, quite a lot together with ECDC and with the Commission, as well as with our aviation stakeholders, ACI, IATA, airline manufacturers, and all the others involved in producing guidelines that are actually customized and harmonized for health preventive measures on the aviation environment. The protocol is structured to follow the full travel experience. It starts even before the passenger leaves for the airport and continues through the process of baggage drop-off, boarding, and flight itself, right up to the moment when the passenger exits the terminal building of the destination airport. The guidelines are based on scientific evidence and expert opinion from EASA and the ECDC, as well as from other aviation stakeholders, in line with the principles of the International Health Regulation from 2005. An important factor that we have taken into consideration when developing this guidelines is that any chain of mitigating measures is as strong as its weakest link. And for this reason, EASA and ECDC, throughout the guidelines and the safety promotion materials, are asking everyone involved to take responsibility to implement the recommendation as applicable for their role. And this includes all the aviation stakeholders and also the public health authorities, but perhaps most importantly, the passengers themselves. Just to run you through the measures, a quick taste of what we have put in. We have divided them, as mentioned, throughout the entire travel. And what we would like to say is that according to the existing scientific evidence, this SARS-CoV-2, the virus actually causing the COVID-19 disease, is mainly transmitted by droplets discharged by infected people through coughing, sneezing, or regular exhale. In a much smaller proportion of cases, the virus can be transmitted by inhaling floating droplets lingering in the air, or by touching contaminated surfaces and then touching the mouth, nose, and even the eyes. So the protocol is structured to include measures to mitigate all these possible ways of transmission, including personal hygiene measures, coughing etiquette, distancing whenever possible, wearing of medical face mask for everyone involved in order to reduce the risk of direct transmission via droplets. In addition, and covering the point that Olivier made earlier, that we need to convince also the staff that this is safe for them to return to work, we have added personal protective equipment and protection screens for staff members depending on their interaction level with the passengers. Finally, to cater for the other smaller possibilities of transmission, we have put in place enhanced cleaning and disinfection to reduce the indirect transmission from inanimate surfaces, as well as enhanced ventilation to reduce the risk of inhaling floating droplets. In addition, as mentioned, we put a lot of focus on the passengers to observe physical distancing wherever possible, and to properly fit their mask and wear it at all times. We have encouraged airline and airports also to develop procedures for the management of passengers who do not follow these requirements. For example, they do not want to wear medical face masks. Passengers should be informed by the airline before arriving at the airport about the preventive measures that are in place in the airport and on board the aircraft. They will be asked to fill in a COVID-related statement confirming that they will not go to the airport if they have symptoms that are relevant for COVID-19, or if they have been in contact with anyone who has such symptoms or has tested positive in the last 14 days. In terms of processes, passengers should check in online as much as possible to avoid queuing in the airport and to avoid contact with staff members. They should have all their documents ready and leave enough time for all the procedures at the airport, but also should avoid spending excessive time in the airport environment to reduce the exposure time. Passengers will also be told to make sure to bring enough medical face masks for their entire journey, taking into consideration that such masks are required to be changed every 4 hours or sooner if they become wet or soiled. At the airport, accompanying persons who are not traveling will normally not be allowed to access the terminal building. This is in order to reduce the risk of transmission by minimizing the number of people in close proximity to each other. Physical distancing of at least 1.5 meters should be implemented throughout the airport where possible, and passengers should be regularly informed to respect the distancing policies in place. Ventilation in the terminal should be enhanced in order to reduce the air recirculation and to increase the amount of fresh air, giving proper consideration to avoiding horizontal flows of air that could aerosolize the set particles. In some locations, thermal screening may be carried out as an additional measure to identify symptomatic passengers and to reduce the risk of having contagious passengers in the airport and on board the aircraft. Passengers should plan and check in as much luggage as possible, taking only what is really needed or valuable to the aircraft. Airlines should incentivize them to do so. And boarding should be arranged in an orderly manner in order to avoid queuing or close contact, as by rows from back to front or by window middle aisle seat, depending on the configuration of the aircraft. On board, a multi-layered set of measures comes together to protect passengers and crew while they are on board. Wherever possible, in the light of operational constraints, passengers should be allocated seat in a distanced manner across the aircraft. Of course, this excludes families and passengers traveling together. Full physical distancing will not be possible on board, but additional mitigating measures are in place to reduce the risk. Firstly, in terms of this measure, firstly, the use of medical face masks at all time and reduce the interaction between the passengers themselves and the passengers and crew, and help to reduce the risk of transmission. Passengers should also be discouraged from moving about the cabin or forming queues near the lavatories. Thirdly, the air quality is very good in the aircraft, and with a full exchange of air every 3 to 5 minutes, this is an excellent protective measure. The ventilation will be enhanced to increase the air exchange and the amount of fresh air, and also to take into account the presence of the high efficiency particulate air filters, the so-known HEPA filters, in order to eliminate any contaminated droplets. More detailed information from this point of view, I think, will be given later on by Bruno and Jim from Airbus and Boeing side. So I will not detail too much. Crews are being given special training for the unfortunate situation where a passenger starts showing symptoms while on board, how they need to manage such persons. And also they will be trained in providing instructions during their safety demonstration, advising passengers that in the unlikely event of a loss of cabin pressure, they should remove their medical face mask before fitting an oxygen mask in order to allow oxygen flow. For disembarking, the measure should be rather similar to boarding, with additional focus on cleaning and disinfection of facilities in the arrival hall and the personal hygiene for the passengers. If required by the state of arrival, thermal screening can also be enforced. Baggage claim process should be enhanced in order to avoid human close contact, and passengers should be encouraged to exit the airport as soon as the procedures have been completed. In order to support the implementation of the protocol and the recommendations, EASA has developed health safety promotion materials to include essential points and provide clear guidance at each step of the journey. These materials are available on the EASA website. Of course, everything was performed in collaboration with our colleagues from ECDC with their advice on public health issues. Thank you very much, Damon. Thank you very much, everyone.
Christian, a very comprehensive set of guidelines you've obviously been working very hard on there at EASA. I just had a few questions just to put to you before you disappear. I mean, one of the big things that there's a lot of talk about at the moment amongst the sector and also amongst passengers and travellers is this sort of middle seating thing. You know, how will people sit on planes from now on? How will this social distancing work?
Damon, this actually depends on the type of aircraft mostly. We all think of a Boeing 737 when we think of this middle seat, but we have a lot of aircraft with even narrow bodier than that, where they have 2 seats on one side, 2 seats on the other, or different other configurations available. There are also some rules regarding the mass and balance of the aircraft. And of course, we take into consideration also the passenger load. As Mr. Marinescu mentioned in his introductory speech, we foresee that from at the beginning, the passenger load will not be 100%, and then this would allow certain distancing in the aircraft. While when the risk will go down and we'll see an increase in passenger load, already the other mitigating measures in place are enough to keep it a very low risk of transmission.
Christian, some governments in the EU right now and elsewhere are telling the public, don't really use public transport if you don't have to. And if you do, don't travel at peak times, keep your distance from everyone. Train operators being told to kind of keep capacity much lower than it has been in the past. Why then should people feel confident about traveling right now? Why is it safer?
Actually, the aircraft environment and the airport environment are a lot safer than the regular public transport, other means of public transport, because of all these layers of protection that we have on board. And as I mentioned, probably Airbus and Boeing will give some more details on this. The air quality, the filtration, the flow of air in the aircraft, the cleaning and disinfection, regular cleaning and disinfection, and also the seating position, the seat configuration, the fact that the back seat of the seat in front is higher, that allows a better protection from the droplets that are emitted by a passenger. So all in all these little layers provide a much higher protective measures and much safer journey.
So in a word, flying is the safest form of public transport right now?
Yes, I would confidently say yes.
Okay, Christian Paniet from EASA, thank you very much indeed for now. If you have any questions for Christian or any of our other guests this afternoon in this Confident Traveller briefing brought to you by A4E, please do leave them in the chat box just next to the video screen where you're watching, and I'll try to put as many of those to our guests this afternoon as possible. Also, just if you're joining us, I'd just like to say that this session is also being recorded for internal purposes as well. So we talked a lot about the airlines, haven't we, during this session so far. Let's now talk to an airline directly. My next guest is Dawn Wilson, who's the Managing Director, Northern Region Airlines at TUI Airways and TUI Fly Nordic. Dawn, thanks very much indeed for joining us this afternoon. Quite an exciting time, really, for the industry this week. I suppose a glimmer of hope after so much doom and gloom, if I can put it that way.
Yes, I have to say it has been a really exciting week. I've been in aviation for 32 years now, and to have a period of time when none of our aircraft are flying has been really quite sad. So yesterday, our first TUI flights got off the ground, leaving Dusseldorf and heading over for Palma in Mallorca. And we had 2 flights yesterday. We're taking part in a program with the Balearic government to initiate tourism and air travel into the island. It went really well. Customer feedback, I've just been on a call with some of our destination staff, and customer feedback was really positive. They're really enjoying their holidays and starting to book excursions, I was hearing. So far, so good.
Because I was going to say, Dawn, it's great that there's a restart in the industry this week, but how much demand is there actually from people? Are people desperate to go on holiday?
I think, when you talk to friends and family, everybody says they want to get away. But whether people will actually travel remains to be seen. What we have seen at TUI is where destinations have started to initiate opening of borders and where countries are allowing flying to actually happen. So we've seen it with Germany and we're seeing it in Belgium. We are seeing bookings starting to improve because customers are starting to see the flights be scheduled. They're starting to get the confidence of speaking to people and hearing other people are booking and seeing the destinations come alive. So Germany and Belgium, our bookings since we opened up our flying programs have really improved.
I mean, just picking up on one of the points you said there, that the EasyJet boss, I was watching him on British television yesterday at Gatwick as the flight started there. He was saying, when people see others flying, that's one of the best ways to increase confidence, get the economy going again and connect across Europe. It is really about sort of spreading the word that it is safe, right, amongst the masses.
Absolutely. And, we take people on holiday as well as just on a flight. And I think when people see our German customers on holiday in Mallorca this week in the newspapers or on social media, I think that's really going to whet people's appetite. And they're going to see that it's safe actually in our destinations as well, because, you know, there's lots of great measures that are being put in place. TUI is an integrated tourism business, so we see and have the opportunity to connect the customer all the way through the journey. And we've put so much in place, not only on board our aircraft, but also in resort, in hotels, and in the future on our cruise ships to make sure they have a safe and enjoyable time, because everybody needs a holiday.
And Dawn, that brings me nicely to my next question. I mean, what can passengers, first of all, expect from TUI when they now fly through the airport and fly on one of your planes? What measures have you been putting in place to make sure that it is safe to fly?
Yeah, well, I think what has been incredibly helpful, and thanks to the guys from EASA for putting in place those guidelines, because across the whole TUI group, we've signed up to the EASA Charter, and very much we are encouraging all our 5 airlines to follow those guidelines, and we operate out of a number of different member states. We are trying to make sure that we communicate to customers in advance of their journey, whether it be a flight or their holiday flight experience, really expecting them to take that information on board and learn a little bit more about how they need to prepare themselves. So we've just produced a video, a short animated film, which is going to go on all our websites and in our customer communication pre-travel. And that gives a really good visual guide as to what customers should expect, what they need to do before they travel in terms of being prepared, making sure they've got their masks, as Christian said, making sure they understand what happens in the airport, they've downloaded their boarding pass, they've considered their hand luggage, how much they're going to take on the aircraft, how much they're going to check in into the hold. And then perhaps just to leave a little bit more time for the journey in the beginning until all the procedures, operational procedures get in place and everybody gets back to understanding what an experience will look like in a post-COVID world. If you look at onboard the aircraft, we've had to put some quite stringent measures in place just to make sure we protect the safety and the health of our customers, but also our crew. So all our crew will be wearing masks and will have the appropriate PPE. Our customers will be boarded in a respectful way, but it will be done very systematically to minimize the contact between the customers. So starting with the last row and then moving forward in groups, as you would imagine, with the appropriate social distancing. We're also making sure our aircraft are super, super clean. We've put advanced disinfection methods in place. That will happen once every 24 hours, at a significant level of disinfection. And then after each flight, we will be focusing in on specific areas and overall cleaning standards. When customers are on board the aircraft, there will be less physical contact. So if they need to go to the toilet, we'll be managing those toilet queues to really minimize the movement around the cabin. And making sure that the onboard service is there, but it is minimized to drinks and to food. So they have the opportunity to purchase something if they wish to, but equally they can bring their own if they feel more comfortable. So really focusing in on that experience and communicating that experience to make it as pleasurable as possible, but also respecting that health and safety of the customer and crew.
Because Dawn, we touched on this earlier on in this discussion, that there's 2 sides to this. There's all the stuff that you and the airports are doing to kind of get people flying again, all the measures that you're putting in place, but it's also down to the passengers, right, to do their part.
Yeah, and I think if people are keen to travel, and, you know, we have very well-traveled populations around the world nowadays, you know, people travel a lot more. I think people will behave responsibly because they'll want to get away to see their loved ones or to go on holiday. So I think customers, as long as they're providing with the right information and we create the right environment for them when it comes to their health and their safety, and they hear that from other customers or other passengers who've travelled, then I think we can make progressive steps for the future.
We've got those sort of baby steps starting this week, you know, with the restart of the aviation industry. Obviously, it's got some way to go. Yeah, how important are things like these sort of air bubbles, travel corridors, the lifting of border restrictions? Because it is a little bit confused right now for some travellers, and we can't go anywhere that we want right now. What do you want to see happen as an airline over the coming weeks and coming months to kind of open up the aviation sector even more?
Well, I live in the UK, so this is especially close to my own heart, because whilst I work for the TUI group and I run 2 of the airlines in Europe in our TUI aviation sector, I'm seeing colleagues being able to start their operations in Germany and Belgium ahead of countries like the UK and Sweden. So actually having a level playing field across all countries would be absolutely fantastic, because I think we all want to get back flying again. We all want to resume our business, not just for economic reasons, but to make sure that, you know, we can get people away. We're a holiday business, so people's well-being, customers' well-being is really important to us. So, you know, I'd really like to see the borders open responsibly and sensibly, and a level playing field in terms of the standards, like the EASA guidelines across not only Europe, but the rest of the world, because we don't just fly within Europe. Obviously, we fly to long haul destinations, and the ICAO guidance equally is helping us in that direction.
And just finally, I mean, obviously you mentioned there that you're more than an airline, you provide holidays as well, and you work in various different tourism sectors. Obviously, tourism is interconnected with flying again. I mean, how important do you think this is all to kind of reviving tourism and travel right across the European Union?
I think it's absolutely critical. When I was talking to our colleagues in destination just now, they were saying that they actually saw people stop in the streets in Spain and clapping as the hotels were opening and the tourism buses were arriving into those hotels. I think it's, you know, it's so important for local economies, you know, for the economic survival of many states when we have been in pretty much a lockdown all across the world for so long. So I think anything we can do to encourage that tourism and really open up those destinations is absolutely critical.
Dawn Wilson from TUI, thanks very much indeed for now from that great insight from an airline's perspective. I'd like to join in my next guest now, Jim Hass, who's the Director of Product Marketing at Boeing. Jim, great to have you with us in this Confident Traveller briefing this afternoon. So we've heard a lot there about what airports are doing, what airlines are doing to reassure passengers that it's safe to fly after the COVID-19 pandemic. Of course, some people will be thinking, do I really want to get in a plane with lots of strangers sat around me? Is it really safe? Just sort of talk us through from Boeing's perspective why you think it is safe to get on an aeroplane.
Hi, Damon, and good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for having me along today. I've got a couple of slides I'd like to share to explain why we are working to make travel by air the safest way to travel. So, first of all, we're looking at this as a multi-layered protection set of measures. You heard quite a bit earlier about the protective measures put in place for the traveler as he goes from his home, doing whatever check-in possible, making sure that he has checked his temperature, making sure he's not traveling when he's ill. You've heard about some of the protective measures put in place at the airports where people are spaced out. Again, they are screened. They are following World Health Organization protocols. That's the first layer. The second layer of protection we see to protect passengers is how we disinfect the airplane. Then the third layer are all the protective measures we have in place on the airplane.
Jim, sorry to interrupt you. Could you just speak up, because we're struggling to hear you?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, excellent, thank you. So again, we see multiple layers of protection, the first being at the airport, the second being how we disinfect the airplane, and the third being all the protective measures put in place on the airplane. Now, one of the things I want to address up front, I've heard several comments about social distancing and is social distancing required on the airplane. Social distancing is something that's very common in everyday life, but equally common in everyday life, there are areas, places we go where social distancing is either not possible or not practical. And in those cases, extra protective measures need to be put in place. And we have those extra protective measures in place on the airplane. So I'd like to take you through a couple of those. I want to focus on two things. First of all, how we disinfect the airplanes, the guidance we give to our operators, and secondly, some of the other protective measures on the airplane focusing on HEPA filters. So first of all, we provide guidance to our airlines not only on how to clean the airplane, but how to properly disinfect the airplane. So we have a message we send out to our airlines, and we revise that very frequently to talk about what chemicals are allowed, how to properly apply the chemicals, and how to properly disinfect the different sections of the airplane. So when passengers get on the airplane, they can know it's not only been cleaned, but it's also been disinfected. We're also providing guidance on the use of antimicrobial coatings that can be sprayed on surfaces to provide a longer lasting effect against viruses and bacteria. And we're studying other measures that can be used on the airplane to disinfect, such as ultraviolet light, amongst a few other things. So these are important measures that we want to make sure that once the passengers have been screened, they come on, they board the airplane, they can feel confident that the airplane has not only been cleaned, but it's been disinfected. So we want to make sure we can kill the viruses on the plane before the passengers arrive. Now, if you can go to the next slide, please. Once the passengers get on the airplane, I want to focus on the quality of the air that's filtered in the airplane. Our Boeing airplanes use HEPA filters. These are high efficiency particulate air filters. I think people have heard quite a lot about these lately. These have been on our airplanes for over 2 decades, and they provide outstanding air filtration. They pull out over 99.9% of viruses, of bacteria, of fungi that are circulating through the air. They're very, very similar to the same type of filters used in hospital operating rooms, hospital isolation wards, and industrial clean rooms. So one of the questions that comes up on HEPA filters is...
And Jim, just move closer to the microphone again, please. Thank you.
Yes, okay. Yes, thank you. I almost am swallowing it, so I'll talk a little bit more loudly. Thank you. One of the issues with the HEPA filtration system that people ask is how effective are they really? What size particles can they absorb? So let me go to the next slide where I talk about, let's skip this one, let's jump to the next one. And the next slide talks about the efficiency of the filter. So what this chart is showing is the efficiency of the filter to be able to capture those particles versus the size of the particle. And you can see on to the right, you can see bacteria, and as you move from right to left, you can see going from bacteria down to virus size. The size of the SARS-CoV-2 virus that causes COVID-19 is right in the middle of the chart at 0.1 micron. And you can see these filters are extremely effective at filtering out not only larger particles, but also much smaller particles. So passengers should feel very comfortable that the air that's coming into the cabin that's been filtered is extremely clean air. It is clean air mixed with outside air, so the air they're getting is clean. So again, just circling back, there are multiple protective measures we put in place to ensure that passengers should feel confident traveling. And one thing I didn't touch on, but Christian and others talked about this as well, are the passengers' personal responsibility of passengers wearing face masks, the way the seating is configured inside the airplane, where everybody's facing forward, there are seats between. I believe Bruno will touch on the air flows in the airplane. But all of these protective measures we feel are in place to allow passengers to feel that they're traveling confidently and comfortably, even as the loads in the airplanes increase. So let me jump ahead to the next slide. And I just want to end by talking about the fact that we are working not alone, but we're working across the industry to help establish this consistent travel experience, this consistent set of guidelines that are so important to reassuring passengers and crews about the safety of air travel. We're working with other airplane manufacturers through international organizations. We're supplying input and data to IATA and ICAO. We're working with universities to validate the studies we're working through. And we are working with ACI, the Airport Council International, to help ensure that passengers can achieve that consistent travel experience that everyone is looking for. So with that,
Jim, thank you very much for that. I've got a couple of questions for you. Some people may be thinking, well, there are some airlines with some old aircraft, there are other airlines with much newer aircraft. Am I going to be safer on a 787 Dreamliner, safer than going on an old 747?
So let's talk about air filtration and the air filters. So the filters I mentioned have been in place for several decades. But one question that commonly comes up is, well, if I fly in a carrier with an airplane that predates those filters, am I still as safe? And the answer is yes, because air filters on airplanes are like air filters you may have in your home or in your car. They need to get replaced at regular intervals. And we define those maintenance intervals for our operators. And people need to understand that even for the oldest airplanes that are in service, the brand new HEPA filters are available. So when they change out those filters, they're putting on the latest filters available.
It strikes me, Jim, that the pandemic had a big impact on other sectors that really had to try and catch up to deal with it and respond to it. But the aviation industry, in terms of the way planes were designed, actually were already designed to deal with things like this, these sort of health concerns.
Well, that's a key point, Damon. We are not making massive changes to the cabin airflow system and the protective measures in place as a result of this virus. Those have been our design criteria for many decades. So this is not the first virus. This won't be the last virus, but we've made sure that our airplanes are designed to protect passengers against viruses and bacterial infection.
Jim Haas from Boeing, thank you very much indeed for your input this afternoon. Very interesting indeed. We're going to cross over now to one of your rivals in the sky, Airbus. We're going to go to Bruno Fagion, who's the project lead for Keep Trust in Air Travel. Bruno, what does that mean, Keep Trust in Air Travel, and what are some of your headlines in terms of safety from Airbus's perspective?
Thank you, Damon. Thank you, Jim, as well, because I think we are really on the same page. Maybe before I start really discussing about the airflow, I'll try to answer this question. And I think the first thing that we share all around the table, and certainly with my colleague Jim, is that we are looking to ensure passenger comfort and passenger safety in our aircraft. And in terms of safety, there is a very old code of conduct in our industry, is that it's a time for cooperation. Whenever we talk about safety, we are cooperating across the board, across this very competitive environment that we are all in normally, and we drop down these barriers to make sure that everyone is really in safe conditions. So I think that's probably one of the key words in our Keep Trust in Air Travel initiative, is to make sure that we collaborate to build the best measures to restart and to keep the trust for air travelers. And by the way, for anybody who is operating in the aircraft. It can be passengers, it can be crews as well, and all the luggage handlers who are around. All these people deserve that we build really a safe way of transporting people. So just to build up on Jim's presentation previously, I think it's quite good because clearly on top of the hospital air filtering grading system that he was describing, we also share with our colleagues some features in our aircraft, and clearly the airflow is one of them. So the air is renewed from 2 to 3 minutes in the cabin, which is very high, very fast, which basically means that any contaminants that you could be exposed to is going to be washed out very quickly from the cabin. The other point also is that this circulation of air, which goes basically from the ceiling to the floor, you can imagine it's like an air shower, which is going really to go constantly and going to flow you in a safe manner and protect you. I want to take also another French image. It's the slice of bread. So if you look at the cabin, in fact, you have to think of it as being a slice of bread, and each row in the cabin is somehow isolated from the other with this airflow, which also brings a lot of value by really making it a very safe environment for each passenger on the cabin. We also have one question very often, so I just prefer to address it directly. The air in the galleys, in the toilets, and the cargo is completely independent, and it's not going to be recircled in the cabin. So it's going to be flushed out directly outside the aircraft. Now, trying to enlarge a little bit the scope here, I just want to come back on the end-to-end passenger experience, which is central to what we are doing, because we are all considering this overall end-to-end passenger experience. Clearly, what we have done here is to build up, as it was explained by previous speakers, we have built a series of measures which are layered, which means that each of them is there to add or to limit the probability to be infected or to be infectious by somebody. And in fact, we are here doing the same as we have done in flight safety for decades. And through this, we ensure that really the probability to be infectious or infected is extremely, extremely low and much lower than in any other transportation means. So once somebody was mentioning the safety of flight, just as a reminder, the air travel has always been the safest way to travel, and I believe it will remain the safest way to travel as well.
And Bruno, when you obviously sell your aircraft to different airlines, the relationship doesn't end there. I mean, how closely do you actually work with the airlines right now to make them obviously aware of what's going on in terms of the design of the aircraft and how they can make sure the passengers are kept safe through the use of that aircraft?
Well, in fact, we have made some specific. I'm just switch to the slide. In fact, the first thing that we have done is to publish operational procedures that the airlines can adopt, and which then brings them to even a safer mode to operate. In a nutshell, these operating procedures are based on what EASA has put up as guidelines, what ITO as well has put up as guidelines. So we are clearly into that line, but we translate them into very operational things, operational matters that the airlines can apply. We said enough, I think, about clean air and safe air and wearing a mask, which protects you from the transmission through the air of the virus. And Jim also touched on the cleaning of the aircraft itself, which is a second important point because it protects you from the contact transmission. Okay, and I believe with these very simple 3 measures inside the aircraft, we are really in a very safe mode.
A really important multi-layered approach. And I mean, I just want to widen this out a bit if I can, Bruno, because obviously safety is very important, and you've highlighted actually the features of the Airbus aircraft, but also to the aviation sector more widely. Obviously, you know, you manufacture planes. There's a lot of stake for you right now. How important is it that you can continue doing what you do as Airbus in terms of contributing to the EU economy?
As you said, I think we are this sector of aircraft and aviation is crucial. To give you an idea, in Europe, it represents around 400,000 jobs for just the aircraft manufacturer and its supplier world. So clearly, I would say these jobs are important because they are a direct contributor to the economy, of course, as well. I think that more important than that, what they are is they represent the future aviation. And clearly making sure that we can have this kind of effort and this kind of jobs in the EU is a way to protect ourselves, our future, and the way we can retransport with new aircraft, most modern, more advanced aircraft in the future.
Okay, Bruno, we've had a couple of questions come in from our audience. I'm just going to put one of those questions to you, if you don't mind. It comes from Louise Barrel, who's an aircraft manufacturer, ATR in Toulouse. Louise is saying, is it not better to get air coming solely from outside the plane than recirculating it?
In fact, when you look at air cabin flow, it's a very complex environment because not only you want to ensure the safety, as I said, but you want also to ensure the comfort. And one of the big points about the comfort is the thermal comfort, whether you will feel comfortable with the temperature. And for this, mixing, recycling part of the air, because half of it is coming from the outside, half of it is recirculated, also helps to build this thermal comfort on board the aircraft.
Okay, Bruno. Jim House, if I can just go back to you at Boeing, do you have anything to add on that in terms of where the air comes from on board a plane?
Yes, so there really is no difference from the passenger point of view as far as the cleanliness of the air. When the air comes into the airplane, it's a mix of outside fresh air and it's a mix of filtered air with all the viruses removed. The one advantage of filtering the air is it retains a little more humidity, so it's more comfortable for the passengers. Plus, when we do that, we actually get higher airflow in the cabin.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that. Christian from EASA, the European Union Aviation Safety Agency, I've got a question that's come in for you, if we can just go back to you. We've got a question saying, do you forecast any future mandates from your agency around onboard products that improve air quality, such as HEPA filters, which we were hearing about from Boeing just then? That one to Christian.
Damon, actually, for the moment, there is no official decision in this regard. We are planning some research activities to see if, additional to this, we can find other methods to improve the air quality and the filtration in terms of viruses and bacteria. But this will take some time to finalize this research and go forward. Anyway, in the current guidelines that I presented, we have certain procedures that are required for the aircraft that are not fitted with HEPA filters. Where exactly what Luis mentioned, for those we ask them to not to use air filtration, but to use exclusively outside air. Where we have the HEPA filters, exactly for the reason that Jim mentioned, we recommend to use the HEPA filters and have a more comfortable stay on board.
Okay, Christian from EASA. Okay, thank you very much indeed. Thomas Reinhardt, I'd just like to go back to you, Managing Director of A4E. Just want to get some final thoughts from you. As the aviation sector restarts this week in Europe, what do you hope will happen over the coming weeks now?
Well, obviously very difficult to predict, but I'd like to build maybe on what Dawn has said. I think people are really looking forward to travel again, go on holidays. So I think the next couple of months will be good tests to see how we're doing. I think the general forecast is talking about getting the capacity up to 30, 40, maybe 50% compared to last year. And towards the end of the year, hopefully we'll get it back to 80% of capacity. So, but again, very important this year. And this is one of the reasons why I think we're having this conversation at the webinar today is, we need to communicate very much that it is actually okay to fly, and people should not be scared. I think just lastly, I think we shouldn't forget that many people have been frightened by governments in the beginning of the crisis for good reasons. For the lockdown, you want to make sure that people realize the seriousness of this pandemic. And now with borders reopening again, I think we've worked very closely with all stakeholders to make sure in governments that it is safe to fly. And so let's enjoy those flights and those holidays as soon as possible.
Thomas, thank you very much indeed for those final thoughts from yourself. Philippe Cornelis, Director of Aviation, DG Move at the European Commission. I'd just like to go back to you in Brussels. From an EU perspective, how important is it that this restart really does step up now and the aviation sector really does get back on its feet?
Well, I think it's tremendously important. And as I was mentioning at the beginning, the best way to safeguard the sector and to ensure its survival is to go back to business. So we are definitely also hoping that over the summer and in a way it's good that in Europe the pandemic is subsiding just before the busy summer season. Hopefully we can regain indeed those 50-60% of traffic over the summer and going up further towards the end of the year, hoping there will be no relapse or second waves, or at least if there are new sources of contamination and new outbreaks, that we are able to contain them better and avoid a complete shutdown of the economy. So I think we have learned also a lot during this crisis, and we will definitely continue from our side at the EU to support with all the means that we have available, both the safety of the public and the survival of the sector.
And Dawn Wilson from TUI, if we can just go back to you for a final thought. As an airline, other airlines haven't been quite so lucky. Some have gone bust, others are facing sort of massive job cuts, financial difficulties. How crucial are the coming weeks and months for an airline like TUI, and what do you want to see now happen?
It's tough at TUI as well as it is, in many airlines, many businesses, not only tourism businesses around Europe. However, what we have seen is the first green shoots this week of us doing what we do very best, which is taking people on holiday, getting aircraft in the air. And I really want to see that happening across the whole of Europe. Aviation is a fantastic business to be in. Not only for the people we take away, but also for the people that work within it. So for our futures and to sustain jobs and help our economic position, I just want to see everybody getting back flying again soon. So fingers crossed.
Okay, good luck with that. Dawn Wilson from TUI, thank you very much indeed for your final thoughts. Well, we're coming to a close with this special session this afternoon, Confident Traveller briefing that's been organised by A4E. We've had some fascinating insights, haven't we, into the state of the industry, where aviation is hopefully going over the coming weeks and the coming months. Lots of reassurance there about how safe it is for passengers to get back in the skies again. I'd like to bring back in Mr. Marinescu, our co-host for this briefing this afternoon, just for some final thoughts from you. I mean, what are some of your key takeaways?
Thank you very much. It was a very interesting discussion, and I want to insist that the industry has to restart the business. This is very, very important for industry first to survive, as Philip said, but in the same time for the economy, yeah, and for the people. In the same time, as it was said here, we have to have the trust of the passengers, because they had a lot of information, they saw a lot. You know that now with all the information on TV, you can see everything. So you have to trust, you have to gain the trust of the passengers. And for this, any measure that it's not putting in danger, maybe too much, but it's putting in danger a little bit the business. But any measure is good. So to take step by step, because you need passengers. First, you need passengers. To have passengers, you need trust. If the passengers, they do not have trust, they will not go for business, they will not go for vacation, and the industry will lose. So I think that the industry should evaluate in this moment which are the best solution and measures to get this trust, and then to proceed step by step in accordance with the evolution of the traffic and in the same time of pandemic. Thank you very much.
Okay, Mr. Marinescu, thank you
I
very
want
much.
I want also to come to Brussels. In this moment, it's not so simple for me to come to Brussels, so I need the industry to help me to be here, to the Parliament.
I think a lot of people would echo that. People are very keen to travel right now. Mr. Marinescu, thank you very much indeed for taking part in this briefing, being our co-host this afternoon. Some insightful comments from you there in Brussels. So thank you very much to everybody for taking part, all of our great panel of guests this afternoon, and also thank you to all of our audience that's been watching this Confident Traveller briefing. Thanks for all of your questions. If you do have any further questions that come to mind following this briefing and you'd like to put them to the panel that we had with you, then please just send them through to the email address A4E that you can see on the screen in front of you, and they will help you out with those and get some answers back to you. So thanks once again for joining us for this briefing. Hope you found it useful and insightful. And if you do get to have a holiday this year, I hope you have safe and happy travels. So goodbye for now.
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.